Hello and welcome back to the Leadership Collective podcast series on global growth and global capability centres, also known as GCCs. In this series, we dive into the dynamic world of GCCs, exploring their rapid evolution and growth worldwide. And in each episode, we give you insights from global experts sharing the latest trends, challenges and opportunities in the GCC landscape. Thanks very much for joining us on today's podcast. Let me introduce you to Vinu Nair. Vinu helps advise businesses on locations from the inception stage right the way through to the implementation of the GCC in the chosen location, and is an expert on the topic and is also an expert in delivering recruitment solutions to help organisations scale GCCs across India. So welcome back, Vinu.
Thank you very much, Chris.
So in the last episode, we covered GCCs and the impact on global growth, as well as covering a wide range of topics, including India's unique role in the GCC landscape and why India has become a global hub for GCCs. So first question for today, could you, following on from the podcast last week, would you mind breaking down the talent structure which is typical within a GCC and how teams are organised in terms of experience and expertise?
Chris, I'd like to give you an idea about how the services companies from India, the large services companies from India or the global multinationals are organized. They have anything between 12 and 14 levels, starting from software engineer going up to SVP, 14 levels. But the GCCs in India are typically a percentage, a small fraction of the large services organization in terms of number of people. So their organization tend to be very flat. In summary, there are 4 levels, I would say, starting with junior. The second one is the middle level. The third one is the senior level of candidates and leadership. So junior starts anything from 0 to 3. Mid is or 0 to 5, and mid is let's say 6 to 10, and the senior one is about 10 plus, anywhere till about 20. And leadership is anything from maybe 18 to 25. So that's how GCC talent pool is structured.
Vinu, thanks for going through that structure. How would you say the structure of a GCC typically differs from the structure if you say didn't have a GCC and you had talent in different parts of the world? Or does it pretty much replicate a typical sort of business model?
At the junior level, it's all about the same. It's skill. When I say skill, he's a Java programmer, she's a Java programmer, he's an SAP consultant, she's an SAP consultant. So services company, junior level, pretty much mirrors what is there in the GCC. But as you go higher, what differentiates the GCC talent is the domain understanding. Let's say somebody has worked in automotive. How well does he know his company from a point of view of what goes into the design, what's procured, what's internally done, what's the cost management, different geographies, etc. How well he knows the design, point number 1. Point number 2 is cross-cultural collaboration. Most of the GCCs work with their counterparts in anything about 25 to 50 countries. So how do they manage these cross-cultural barriers? That's one very important thing. And the third thing is about communication. I'm not saying language communication, but in terms of how precise, crisp, how detailed they are, and how they could really give a picture of where the organization is headed, where they should be headed, what technology does for them. These are things people in GCCs are very likely to do rather than services companies, because remember, services companies is 1:n ratio, which means they're one company and servicing n number of customers. But GCC is 1:1. You have only one customer. So how much you know about that customer matters a lot.
Yeah, just a follow-on question from that. So what about, so kind of a similar question, but specifically with IT service organizations. So GCCs in India often tap into similar talent pools within an IT services organization. So how does that talent structure differ compared to a modern GCC?
I'll give you some numbers for you to understand this. Let's say I go to a campus. What we call as a campus is an institute where there are 1,000 people passing out. 1,000 people are eligible to apply for a role in a GCC or a services company. A services company would come there to hire 100, typically 10% of the talent that is there. Okay, a GCC would go to hire less than 5 people from there. So a GCC would look for some of the best talent within the campus or the institute that they're going to go. And a services company would have their the talent bar not so high. They still look for talent because they have to work with global organizations, but a GCC does not have the machinery or the wherewithal to train like a services company. They would expect to hire the best, train them very little, and then they get on with the job. But services companies are very well entrenched, have a deep process to train people and get them up to speed.
If you're an organization that was, let's say, moving into India, for example, and they was looking at the options between an IT, more traditional IT services company where back in the day it was more about kind of cost of acquiring the talent. Now we're talking a lot more about quality. What other differences, what other sort of considerations should an organization be thinking about when they're considering an IT services company versus a GCC now?
I'll split my answer into three things here, three or maybe four things. The first one is, where is your talent pool coming from? Most GCCs hire from services companies because a candidate moving from a services company to a GCC, the salary expectation is lower or the salary budget is lower, whereas a GCC to a GCC is much higher. So number one, they look to hire from wherever the talent lies, where there should be services companies where they can hire from. So they have to look at three or four things. One of them is talent pool availability. Where is the talent pool that's available for the kind of skill that they're going to look at? And what's the longevity that they're going to have in that location? So they have to choose a location based on these factors, longevity and talent pool availability. The second thing that they could perhaps be interested in is what is the kind of local government support that's being provided. India has got states, what we call as states here, which could be counties in the UK. And these states compete with each other to attract GCCs into their respective state. So some of them give facilitation services in terms of land pool, the infrastructure that's provided, help with colleges where they can recruit from, etc. And the third thing is they should be clear about the talent one they want to hire, because I was speaking to a prospect of mine. They wanted one particular sector in healthcare that they want to hire from. So their talent is limited, or the scope or the location is limited to where that particular talent lies. But let's say you look into Java programmers or SAP talent or infrastructure, it's pretty much uniform across the major cities in India, leaving out the metro cities, which is Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, and NCR. So all the tier 2 cities have almost the equal number of talent. So point number one, they have to look at what is the skill that they want to hire and how long they want to be in the location. The second is what's the local government support that they're likely to get. And third is what is the skill that they want to hire and does it exist there? That these are three factors that they'll have to keep in mind.
Is it a right assumption to say historically, we like on the last episode, we looked at the history of GCCs or offshoring into India and how it's evolved into GCCs, into almost like a new era, and where things might end up eventually in the future, and your views around that. But if we're looking back just for a second, is it right to say that typically people would offshore to a IT services company mainly based on cost, whereas one of the biggest differentiators now, and maybe the shift towards GCCs, is because there's a higher focus and prioritization around quality? So the IT services companies, I guess, will always or often hire people that are at the junior end, whereas with GCCs, it's more about the quality, hiring from services organizations to really increase the quality of the work that's conducted. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you are right. Let me give an example. Let's say we are talking about a $10 billion organization, which requires about let's say 2,000 people to support their IT infrastructure, do their R&D, and do their digital transformation, analytics, whatever it is. I mean, these days, it's AI and ML. Let's say they want to work on these four areas. GCCs don't hire all 2,500 on their roles. They continue to use IT services companies, which have been their backbone of support over several years. They tend to keep the niche work to themselves, which involves their own growth in the industry, their own competition in the industry. And remember, one of the key reasons why they're coming here is because the talent that they're looking for to enhance their competition in the market and help their growth story is available in India more than any other geography for the cost that they can afford. So in the IT parlance, they call it keeping the lights on, which is 80% of the work, which is maintenance support, is easily done by services companies with their existing partnership or new partnership. So that's on. The 20% of the work, which is cutting edge R&D, new work, digital transformation, AI, ML, companies tend to hire those talent and keep it in-house. So that's the backbone of, or that's the thought behind setting up a GCC in India.
So you're kind of splitting, in a way, the benefits of hiring and keeping niche talent to deliver key roles with the benefits of outsourcing from a cost perspective and a scale perspective to an IT services organization, for example.
Yeah, I'll give you one more example to substantiate that. Let's say you are the CIO and you have given one important piece of work to me to do digital transformation of a project, which let's say takes about a year to deliver. Okay. And in the ninth month as an IT services organization, I could be moved to a newer project. I could do a KT to an equally responsible, equally skilled person, but a lot of it is lost in translation. Yeah, remember IT services organization don't tie a contract to a person, they tie it to the output, that is the work that's to be delivered. But juxtapose me with a GCC employee and you as a CIO are talking to me for the next 2 or 3 years, I'm very likely to be doing the same project, enhancing it as per the needs of the business and seeing it through to fruition.
Do you think that component will continue to evolve too? The combination of the benefits between hiring the niche talent within a GCC to an IT services company for cost and scale reasons, and that dynamic, do you think that dynamic will carry into the future, or do you think it'll shift again?
I think it will carry on because when I worked at the services organization in the past, I was so happy working for multinational organizations and delivering value. Okay, but I never saw the result of my projects because I do the project and move on. Okay, but when I work for a GCC, I'm there to measure the result of the projects that I do, and I can move from one level of project to the next level of project to the next level of project and grow in a way that I'm closer to the CIO organization than in an IT services organization. So I think the candidate defines it more than the GCC customer or the services customer. Where do candidate aspirations lie in terms of growth?
What about the challenges and opportunities when it comes to talent management? So, what are some of the biggest challenges that GCCs are facing in managing talent, especially in a competitive market like India?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges is how do they go about evaluating their vendors or recruitment partner? India is a very nuanced market in terms of hiring. You have a requirement and you always get 1:100 or 1:50 in terms of resumes. So how do you evaluate those resumes? The second point is how do you sell the opportunity to the candidate from a point of view of the candidate not looking for a salary hike alone, but to join an organization and to do quality work and benefit. And the third aspect is how do you sell the organization, considering that there are so many GCC organizations in India that are coming up and that are already established. When I go to a good talent, he or she would need to understand more about the opportunity than what he or she is currently working on or has an offer. So companies which are very well versed with these three factors can help. That's point number one. Point number two, is it may be politically wrong, but I should say this because I face this with a lot of organizations, is the leadership within the GCC organization uh, has to be aligned to the ground realities of the market in India from a talent perspective. Many a times you have GCC leaders who are bought in from another geography and put in India, and they are not closer to the market in terms of talent market than a leader should necessarily be. Remember, one of the fundamental reason why you're setting up in India, one of the fundamental reason is talent. And the third thing is how do you evaluate a candidate? The most customary way of evaluating the candidate is have a technical round in India, one or two rounds in India, and the selection is largely resting with a hiring manager in the US. That's a very difficult choice to make in India because of the time zone, point number one. And I always say this to customers that if you want to hire 100 roles, remember you're doing close to 800 interviews in the form of first interview, second interviews, HR, and offer, and of which 250 interviews are going to be done by hiring managers in the US, which is very, very daunting. Yeah, and you can't keep a candidate on hold for that long. There's a lot lost between keeping a candidate on hold and finishing the interview. So the elbow space or the freedom to decide on candidates should be pretty much be with the GCC organization in India rather than the parent or the business function in any other geography. So these 3 points is something that I think defines how they go about their hiring.
In my experience as well, being in the recruitment industry and recently learning a lot about the Indian market, the pace of hiring in India is incredibly high, right? So the candidate, dropout rate, people that don't show up on the first day, it is much, much higher than many other countries. Is that correct, Vinu?
Yeah, typically we call it interview drops in India. Interview drops are anything between 30 to 40%. But the more alarming thing is you go through the process and offer the candidate offer to joining ratio, as we call it, is under 50%.
So I think this is a real key point for those that haven't recruited in India. So you kind of basically need to hire two people for every one that shows up in reality. Obviously, you can mitigate this to a certain degree within the process. I think what it highlights to me is that the onboarding process of a candidate is always important, no matter what the role in recruitment, from exec level right the way through to junior roles in any country. But in India, it's particularly important to minimize the impact of the low offer to joining ratio.
Yeah, speed, touch points, these are important. And I would like to highlight here that Antel has got more than 90% CV to interview ratio, in the sense that once an interview is confirmed, 90% of the time a candidate shows up. And we go about in the market saying that our offer to joining ratio is anything about 75 to 80%. Other than the pandemic year, we have been able to achieve these numbers.
So you talked earlier on about the hundreds of CVs or resumes coming through, trying to qualify the individuals that are, not only looking for a pay rise, but also qualifying the individuals based on their skills. How do you do that within India? In your own experience, how do you get to that high ratio? What's the key to managing that kind of a recruitment process?
The fundamental aspect is what we call a despecialization. So I'll take three roles here. One is a full stack developer, which is a very, very common hire in India. The second is a cybersecurity consultant, and the third is an SAP consultant. So if you look at a resume that comes in, have all these three keywords for the role for a full stack developer, he would say any of the technologies like a Java or a .NET or a Node.js will be there. Full stack developer will be there. 7 years of experience is there. But if you are a recruiter specialist in the full stack area, when you open the CV from the kind of companies the person has worked with, the tenure and the kind of projects, within 2 minutes, you'll be able to assess whether the candidate is worth a second look. So that's a very conventional one. What you do is desk specialization. Day in and out, the recruiter works in full stack. So he or she has an idea about 1,000 companies from where a candidate could come. How do candidates structure their CV? What is the skill level, etc., etc. Okay, that's a very fundamental thing. We've been using different ATSs, applicant tracking systems, which will help you have a very nascent AI level where you feed the JD in and then you direct the pipe of CVs to it and it will pick out the 10 CVs. Okay. But remember one thing that even before the role lands on you, if you have 10 good full stack developers for a particular geography, then your job is much easier because you know what a good candidate looks and how easy you can set it out. So at a fundamental level, it is desk specialization, how good a recruiter is able to read a CV and then screen the candidate and send it to the client. Second thing is use technology to a certain level. And the third is, do you have a talent bank, not of thousands of CVs, but let's say 100 CVs for a particular skill in a particular geography. So you can be very quick. So AI can still wait, but if you have these fundamentals in place, you can do a very good job and you don't have to go through thousands of CVs before you do the 1:5 ratio, which is 5 CVs to get a candidate select.
Yeah, interesting. And I know I won't go off onto the topic of AI today, but I'm sure that in the recruitment market, that's going to play a bigger and bigger component from a recruiter's perspective over the next year. We've already seen a huge shift in AI being rolled out to in various areas of recruitment, but particularly around the assessment of a resume or a CV. So it'd be interesting how that develops. You were talking about having local leaders basically, or leaders that know the Indian market more specifically. Does that create a different challenge though, where maybe if they are based in India, know the Indian market, maybe haven't worked much outside of India as a leader, does that create a different challenge from a cultural side with then aligning with the overall leadership that might be, let's say, in the US or Europe or Asia or somewhere else? Does that create a different kind of challenge? How do you find that balance?
Or such candidates do not exist because 95% of the IT business in India is catering to the world outside India. So if I am a leader with 15 years of experience in the IT industry, I would have lived and worked in a particular geography or 2 countries or 3 countries, at least for 4 to 5 years during my 15 years. And I would have traveled n number of times to Europe and North America, maybe less to the Far East, but Europe and North America multiple times. So I know the lingo of the world, the cultural differences, the geographies, the time zones, the opening statements, the closing statements, the professional etiquette around working with it. So when I say that, these are candidates who have preferred not to work in another geography but to stay back in India.
I understand. So really the summary then is that from what you were saying earlier is to hire leadership, either in country or that knows the Indian market is a real positive thing to do, and actually with very little downside, if any, because they leaders tend to have the expertise external to India as well. So you're kind of getting the skill, the understanding, the cultural understanding and the skills to deliver a GCC very effectively from that early stage through hiring great leadership.
Exactly, exactly. I'll give you an analogy. I was doing a project in China many years ago for an SAP implementation, and the project manager from the customer side was of Korean origin but an American citizen. And he brought in a core team, because we were doing a multi-country rollout, and he bought the project team from 4 different countries. Okay, but we were implementing out of China to all these 4 geographies. So what I wanted to highlight there was that since the project is being rolled out to multiple countries, you brought in people from those nationalities into the project, but rolled it out from China. So when you go to a GCC, it's important that you have someone from the HQ, as they say, headquarters in the GCC here in India, but it does not necessarily have to be the head of the center.
Right. You're kind of bringing in the DNA and the culture of the organisation at a leadership level to work alongside the leader of the GCC, who has more of a, I guess, local understanding in many cases. Again, from another point you raised here around the fact that there's a lot of GCCs being set up in India. I think I'm right in saying it's one a week at the moment, which is a very large amount of GCCs popping up into India. You talked about one of the key components is how you sell the GCC, your GCC as an organisation compared to all the others that are out there to potential candidates to get the best talent. I'm guessing particularly in the niche areas where they're high in demand. What kind of things is the talent looking for, and how do organisations sell their particular offering versus the competition in your experience to maximise their results?
I can talk about some of the customers that I work with. There's a particular customer which does in-flight entertainment and communication. So when a candidate walks through their shop floor or their production floor and sees the kind of equipment that is housed in different generation of aircrafts, starting from the oldest aircraft, which is about 35 years old in somebody's fleet, to the latest one which is going to arrive next year, and looks at the kind of hardware and software that is there, and gives the candidate a feel that, hey, we are going to develop this, and people from over 150 countries travel 40 airlines to maybe 250 destinations which are going to use our software. A candidate would love to hear that story, saying that what he does is going to touch so many people, and he would love to do that. The second is I can talk about one of a large US retailer setting up the contactless billing system for their retail. The entire system was developed in India during the pandemic. It went live just after pandemic. And it was there in the news all over the media. It was reported in the media. And when I came to UK and I was walking around an aisle in the morning at 7 o'clock, I didn't see a billing clerk, and the watchman came and told me, hey, it is self-billing. Uh, for me, it was something great. And I would like to say it was developed in India. And remember, candidates who worked in services companies did not have this sense of claim or achievement as much as the GCC candidates have today.
So a lot of it's around the storytelling, basically, is what you're saying. So making sure that they know what they're contributing towards.
Yeah, it should not be a labor arbitrage story.
Yeah, and we talked about that a lot last week, didn't we? Of the evolution of it being a cost driven exercise offshoring to India, and the older models nowadays that's really moved on quite substantially. So it sounds like the storytelling is actually one of the biggest components. Are there any other components you think will help you secure the candidates, reduce the amount of people that don't show up on their first day, and all those other things we talked about? Is there anything else other than the storytelling?
Yeah, the other thing is what's going to be their presence in India? Okay, from short term, medium term, long term. So that'll definitely cut ice, and you throw in some retention programs around it. That'll attract the candidate. Retention program from a point of view of skilling the candidate, both in terms of external education as well as internal training. Then travel relating to seeing the project go live, working with business leaders in other geographies, because these are like cherry. Candidates love it because they're going to literally meet business people and see the impact that the project is having on themselves, on their business. So the whole 9 yards of the story has to be rolled out, what they're going to do in 3 and 5 years. To talk to the candidate from a perspective of how he or she is going to benefit from the longevity in the organization, medium and long term, in terms of skill as well as external programs, and how integrated they are going to be to see the business go live. And one other aspect I would like to touch is, I may be emphasizing too much on IT here, but it's not only IT that's being delivered out of India. The whole sense of business which is delivered through IT is delivered from India. So some of the core business leaders are going to be based in India, and the future is not far off when the CFO organization is going to be based in India.
Yeah, we touched on that last week again, didn't we, about the future of the leadership likely to be hosted in India as time develops, or hosted wherever the GCC is in the world. So it's going to be interesting to see how this model develops at pace, which I'm sure it will. Let's talk about some of the pitfalls and difficulties of GCCs. So maybe you have some examples of existing global capability centres that maybe went off to a good start. However, without naming names, some of the examples of the pitfalls that have led to some failures or challenges within those GCCs.
So this is actually the wave two or wave three of GCCs coming into India. What happened in wave two? That's about 2007, 2008, 2009. There was a spurt in number of GCCs coming to India, but it was largely about labor arbitrage. So when they came into India at that point of time, they were slightly cheaper than the services organization, but they really did not have the HR organization to not retain candidates solely based on salary. So you can't give an increment year on year and make your organization viable. So some of those GCCs really sold back to services companies, and they're coming back in other avatar today. So that's one of the things that they did not do was have an effective HR strategy to grow their organization, and they have the whole story of how they're going to paint a picture and what are the objectives for 5 years, 7 years, and 10 years. So that's very important thing. That's why they failed. And the second one is they did not give the local leadership enough elbow space to operate on their own. So you can have the IT center based out of India with 1,000 employees, and it reports to one VP who reports to an SVP, he reports to an EVP, and EVP reports to CIO. Then you're really being a back office.
So how do you help? Well, how have you helped organisations get back on track where maybe the legacy infrastructure they've had isn't sort of fit for purpose for maximising their outputs within a GCC? How would you, have you got any examples of how you've helped organisations to get back on track?
I mean, as a recruitment specialist and having helped organizations choose a location, doing a BOT model, our expertise does not extend to the management part of it. So I would say that's an area which I do not have much exposure. There are the big four organizations who are connected to HQ headquarters who do the assessment and help. So that's an area where I have limited knowledge, Chris.
Okay, no problem. Talk to me a little bit about cultural implementation. From everything that we've spoken about, that seems to be a really important component to getting things right when you're growing a GCC. So how have you seen organisations foster that sort of environment? More holistically, because I know GCCs can grow into the thousands, right? So how do they make sure that the cultural side is looked after and is maximised to help really make an impact within their organisation?
Yeah, one of the most important things that they have to do is get the team integrated into the culture of the organization by doing certain exercises. You have to drill it into the candidate's head through pictures, events, involving them in certain activities that this is their core business objective. So, for example, someone says that, okay, we are an automotive company, but we build cars for the future. So this is a constant messaging that you have to deliver to people saying that, hey, your job is not limited to writing code, but you have to write the best of the best code because we are going to have cars of the future. That's point number one. Okay, so the messaging is very, very important. Point number two is I see customers having cultural ambassadors. The Koreans used to do that a lot when they had a blitz of Korean companies starting car companies in India and hundreds of their partners coming into India. So they used to have cultural ambassadors from the parent organizations go into every component suppliers of theirs and involve in the local culture a lot. Then it's easier to promote the headquarters culture. So you get me where I'm coming from. You can talk about Thanksgiving, you can talk about Black Friday, you can talk about Christmas. Okay, but if you don't understand the local festivals, which is Diwali, and you don't understand the festival that's coming in the middle of Jan called Pongal, then you're forcing something onto them. But if you play both, then the candidate likes the fact that the my employer is concerned with both. So that's an area where cultural integration happens. The third thing is having employees in both the geographies. You can move an Indian to one of your main offices across the globe, and you can move people from that office to India. So India is not seen as the back office. India is not seen as the R&D center alone. The Indian team is seen as part of that brand's team or part of that company's team. So I see successful companies doing that in many ways by getting people to work in their global centers and people from global centers coming and working in India. So the word spreads very easily, saying that hey, it's not only an outpost that we have there, it's very integrated within our ecosystem.
We covered off a few elements, so how to attract the talent into the organisation, some of the dynamics around onboarding talent, and some of the ratios around CVs to interviews, as well as people being onboarded, which is a very big differentiator compared to large parts of the rest of the world. And we've talked a little bit about the cultural side. So what about the retention of talent? So how, what are some of the key strategies, particularly in GCCs and within India, to actually retain the talent long term? When I know that the churn rate can be quite high in India.
The number one point is quality of work. So that is the stickiest factor as far as candidate is concerned. The quality of the work that you give, he or she knows that their work is very valuable to the organization and it's cutting edge. The second is how do you upskill them? Not everybody works on the latest project, but they should be ready for the latest project. So how do you upskill them? The third is growth within the organization. I touched upon this. A growth within the organization could be based in the GCC in India, or could be a GCC in other geography, or could be in headquarters, or could be in one of the major centers. Yeah, and point number 4 is growth within the teams. Services companies give promotions once in 3 years, but GCC would not give a promotion once in 3 years. But you can reward them with higher quality of work that they do and then promote them every 4 years. And GCCs, by the way, have much lesser attrition rates than services companies. Attrition rates for services companies are the higher teens, and GCCs are the higher single digit numbers. So people are doing a lot within GCCs. They know the formula. Most of the companies do it very well to retain talent.
It seems to me that if you compared it to other parts of the world in general, the employee development sounds like a really key component in particular, as it often is, but particularly in India, to upskill, give longer term future career prospects for the individuals, promotion tracks, those kind of things. It sounds like there's kind of a bigger lean towards that maybe than compared to other countries.
Yeah, because you're managing much smaller teams than a services company manages. The ratio is 1:20 invariably.
Okay, good. And just before we sort of start to wrap up, so do you have any additional advice for companies considering India for their GCC compared to other countries which also offer the ability to roll out a similar initiative?
Yeah, I mean, at the cost of reputation, I would like to say your objective should be very clear why you're setting it up. And I think the number one objective should be to leverage the talent more than the cost. Cost is definitely cheaper, but leverage the talent. And the second thing that you have to keep in mind is the kind of projects that you're bringing to the GCC. And the third one that you have to keep in mind is to do any better than the existing GCCs is to talk to some of the enabling organizations in India. One company that I can think of, or one body that I can think of, NASSCOM, NASSCOM. NASSCOM is the enabler for IT services business that happens out of India, be that GCC or services companies. And the fourth point I would like to say is that have an external agency define your strategy or look into the strategy implementation. Then that the external agency need not be the large consulting organizations of the world. There are GCC specialist organizations in India which do that. I'm not pointing a finger to myself, but I'm saying that there are a few like us, a few like Antil, who are on that path for the last few years, so they can help stabilize the center much earlier than you think you could normally.
Just before we wrap up, Vinu, if you're a CTO, a CIO, an HR leader, or indeed a CEO that's considering setting up a GCC in India, do you have any kind of final general thoughts on today's podcast about things they might want to consider? Maybe 3 key takeaways, for example.
Again, I may be repeating this, but number one takeaway is the kind of projects that you want to implement. It need not be all cutting edge, but they need to be the latest. For an e-commerce company, it could be what 10 other e-commerce companies are doing, but for you, it will be the latest, and it's very useful to further your business. So anything which has business objectives to be met through an IT project, that should be number one on your plate. Number two, remember that if any country could offer you 10 resources for a particular skill with years of experience, India could offer 100. So you don't even have to do a talent pool evaluation. All you have to do is evaluate which geography in India is where you want to set up. And number 3 point, I would say is that India is a wonderful place to be in. We have political stability. We are a very safe country, a lot of cultural diversity. I know of customers who had people living here for 104 weekends and would have done at least 60 odd trips to see different parts of the country. So it's a great place to be in, and it could be rewarding for the person from the headquarters to be based out of here and know a country so intimately.
Vinu, that's been really great. Thank you very much for your time again here today. And thanks to everyone watching or listening to the podcast today on the subject of global capability centres and their impact on global growth at the moment. If you're a leader looking to connect with like-minded professionals, do join our community. Just click on the link in the description. Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with anyone interested in the global future of business. So coming up, we will be moving into discussing other topic areas relating to GCCs, what countries you might want to be considering. So we'll do a bit of a deeper dive into that topic, because there are obviously other countries outside of India that are worth considering as well when it comes to setting up your Global Capability Centre. So stay tuned also for the next episode, which will be focused on organisational growth with Global Capability Centres, where we look at how a GCC can essentially become a hub for your fast and sustained growth into the future. So thank you very much for joining us today, Vinu, and look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris. It was my pleasure to speak to you, and all the best with the podcast.